Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Steve Wolfe. Steve is the president of Beyond Earth Institute, co-founder of CWSP International, deputy executive director of Global Spaceport Alliance, and author of The Obligation, a journey to discover human purpose on Earth and in the cosmos. Steve, welcome to the Future Space.
Hey, Danielle. Good. Excellent to be here.
Listen, you and I, we've talked a lot, and we can go over so many topics. We'll talk about your books. I read it. I really love it, and I want to dig deeper into it. But first, before we go there, let's start with your 3 words that capture the essence of space for you.
Yeah, this was an interesting one. 3 words. I think I would say unlimited potential for life. So, I think that's what came to me. So that's what I feel. There's so many other words you could use, but I think that works for me.
Excellent. And beyond, you read the newspaper and you see all the investments that go within to space nowadays. A lot of it has to do about science and technology. But beyond that, what do you think for you is the human story of going to space?
Well, right. I do think that our this evolutionary process that we're in to expand beyond this Earth into space is very much a human story. You could say a biological story. And that's what has always most intrigued me about space flight. It is there are obviously positive benefits on the commercial side, but I think it is once we as we expand into space, those differences between nations starts to fall away. We start to put ourselves into a larger context. We're not just part of a nation or a tribe or even a planet. We're part of a solar system. And so we just have to think differently about who we are on this Earth.
Now, the book is like a deep reflection on the responsibility that we have carrying life forward. It ends with, I don't know if there are things that you want to, you don't want to reveal and you want people to read the book, but the writer of the book talks about that he came to this realization. You personally said that you wanted to write the book because it is an experience that you had.
Well, I would say that it is a work of fiction, so we got to be clear. So it's not not autobiographical. Although I will say that it is a thought work in that I chose to convey my philosophical ideas in the context of a fictional book, similar to Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, if you've read that, or the Celestine Prophecy. These books that are that tell a story, but in the context of that story are conveying philosophical principles. And so I found those books easier to digest and to read. And so as I was contemplating this, that's sort of the approach that I took. The main character works on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. And I, early in my career, I worked on Capitol Hill. So it's one of these things you kind of write what you know. So that sort of helped in my crafting of the overall structure of the story and so forth. And then, that's how I approached this work.
It was a question that was in the back of my mind as I read the book, the format of telling a story, and because I think that one of the most interesting things about the human species, and in fact, I was listening to an interview earlier that I was saying that the 2 most important inventions of the human species. One is mathematics, or the understanding of the more the rational, and then the second is storytelling. Right? There's If we compare ourselves to the animal kingdom, those are really the two things that separates us from the animal kingdom: our capacity to rationalize and quantify the life around us. And then the other one is storytelling, creating these things that have no other purpose than to transmit information in a more emotional or connected way. And so, was that a really like a purposeful intent of you to transmit the the thoughts that you had within the context of a story? There's a love story in the book that just is there to enrich the experience, but it doesn't add to the message of the book, but it's just a better experience, right?
Well, it's interesting, the love story in that, and you're right about storytelling. We like to tell stories. People like to listen to a story that has a beginning, middle, and end, and has a satisfying ending. I actually chose the love story, or added a love story to this because the love interest for the fellow in the book represented. I wanted her to represent the environmental position, right? So she was an environmentalist, and he was working in space policy, and I really I used her intentionally to try to bring in that perspective, and to have a dialogue around that perspective, because there's so much, and as you know, there's so much discussion in the space community. Well, why do we want to go into space when the Earth needs so much healing, and we're just junking up the Earth, and we're going to leave Earth behind to go out into outer space? These kinds of conversations, which you and I wholeheartedly disagree with, that we both want to save the planet, we want to nurture the planet, even as we look to expand beyond this planet. And so that's really what, you're right. In some ways you could look at that and say, well, did he really need to have a love interest, or partner? I think, not necessarily just in and of itself, but he needed to have somebody in the story who served that part. And in my mind, it made perfect sense, for that to be a love interest.
I mean, that is the human experience. This is what you see in all the movies. It's that these all these ingredients that we can connect to, that because we're not machines. We're not. It's not just a question of putting inputs and then here you have the output. It's really this bag of, like, it's like a recipe. Like it's a dish with all these spices, and love is part of it, and that what people can resonate. Is that when you said that the book was semi biographical? Was that also part? Was that element of that woman part of that something that was connected to you?
No, no. And when, yeah, the only thing I'll say about the auto, I would say that really nothing in the book is really autobiographical. I might have picked, Washington scenes from here and there to sort of, that help to give structure to the story. But yeah, no, this the she was fictional. Maybe bits and pieces from some acquaintances I might have had over the years, but so but it is. But it is so important. I think, one of the things, as we were talking about this, an important dimension of the book is this pairing, right? The yin yang pairing of things in the universe, right? So there's a sense of balance, and I like to think that the main character and this partner of his represents that kind of a balance between, and again, and in the book I call this a twin obligation. So the main obligation in the book that I'm talking about is our obligation as a species to take the seeds of life that emerged on this planet and take those seeds and plant them on other planetary shores so that they could take root, right? So we're the that's our role. That's our evolutionary obligation. But then we have another twin obligation, and that is to restore and nurture this planet that gave us life, right? So it's this balance, and some of us are going to choose to leave the world, right, and start new civilizations, but many of us will choose to stay here and restore this planet to its some kind of a garden state that it once was. Not in the same way, of course, but in the context of evolved, mature technologies that are clean and so forth. Um, and I think that's the way it should be. And it really right now we're in a sense of we're in this moment of this tremendous tension because there's this urge to leave this planet, right? Some of us, you feel this urge, I feel this urge. Many people in the space community feel this urge, and we're not quite there yet, right? We're like we're at such a state of a desire to wanting to make that break from the planet, but we're still literally decades away. But I think through the work that you're doing and people throughout the space community, hopefully within a few decades, we'll start to see those first those first pieces of civilization taking root on other planetary shores, whether it's Mars or Moon and free space and the asteroid belt and so forth. And once we get to that stage, then there's this release. There's a relief, I should say, where this sort of natural. We start to see this sort of natural relief, and the world can start to see itself more comfortably in the context of a solar system, not just a single precious pearl, um, vulnerable to everything. But now we have the potential to restore the planet. We have resources to restore the planet. It's we're not all essentially civilization isn't all in one basket.
No, absolutely, and you're totally right. I mean, we are still quite far away from living in space and having these colonies. And to be honest, I'm not too sure that I will still be alive to see that, to see the our vision of it. I think what happened in 2021 or 2020 for most of the people is that space became just a reality. And now we know we can do it. We know that this is the next place. And so it's just at the beginning. But there's still a humongous period of transition or expansion. You know, if we go back into the age of exploration, the European migration between the first European, the landed in the Bahamas, and whatever happened. But between that and, let's say, the foundation of the United States, there was a long time of development and roughing it. So the the space is that next frontier, that new land of opportunity, the place where at one point there's going to be a new body of governments that will be built on the vision that we have. But there's a lot of stuff that are going to happen. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of disruptions that are going to happen, in between. But there's definitely this. I was interviewing Helen Hubby the other day from Exploration Company, and she was, for her 3 words to describe space, her first word was team. And I mean, a lot of people have been talking about it's impossible to go to space without doing it with other people. This is not something that you just, you step out and say, I'm going to be, not like being a solo wilderness explorer where you can just get into your car and you go, and it's like, I do it by myself. Space requires the input and the collaboration of a multitude of parties. I mean, we just saw what James Webb, was able to accomplish all these countries that got together. Absolutely amazing. But I love in your book you talk about, it's obviously that this duality between these two poles of energy, and you define them by the feminine and the masculine, not necessarily because they're men and women. It's just a different energy, like the yin and the yang. And I think that for me, I've always seen life and nature as this constant um, dance between two poles, and that is what creates the tension, right? The heart is always between two states, and it's a contraction that creates the tension and creates life. And it takes two to, well, still today it takes two different energy to create life. And the more, and they complement each other. And even in your book you talk about, in the you have the wanderer, the inventor, the visionary, and the conscious explorer, which are more the masculine, the one that the risks and goes. And then you have the settler, the builder, the protector. You don't go into the last one, which kind of curious what would be the complementary to the conscious explorer. Are you would you care to share your mind on that?
Oh yes, I've been working on uh gosh, I've been working on the sequel to that, and I know that I sort of teased that there's in the book I cover 7 endowments, right? And so then I teased that there's an eighth endowment. Um and just to bring folks up to speed, what I postulate or what I convey in the book, that is that there are certain endowments that we humans have been given that have not only allowed us to live and thrive and develop over these 100,000 years or so, but these were the very set of endowments that allowed us to get to where we are as spacefaring as a spacefaring civilization. These are the tools that we needed so that we could construct the ships, or seed pods, as I call them, to carry the seeds of life into space and so forth. And as you mentioned, it was the wanderer, the builder, the inventor, the protector, and so forth. And then I felt, but then the other one is we those the first 6 endowments get us to a certain point, but sort of breaking that veil, breaking that last bit to get us from where we are as an advanced technological civilization, to get us to making that last step to stepping off the planet, required something called a conscious evolver, meaning that we had to, and that's where this speaks to what you just said, Daniel. We have to consciously make this step. It's not an easy one, and it's not an obvious one. It's not necessarily intuitive, even though we may be feeling it. And of course, it is something that you can't, not just one person or a small group of people need to do. We kind of need to do it collectively as a collective society, and be confident about that, so that we can organize the resources that are available, right, in order to make that happen, because it's not insignificant. So we have to consciously evolve into the future. And then the the last endowment, which or I shouldn't say the last endowment, because the endowments, I don't know, in the evolution of mankind, we have no idea what we're going to be, 10,000 years from now, in terms of what is going to make us us, in terms of our, the endowments that we're going to be applying to life in space and on Earth. But I think well, there's only one endowment that I see for the eighth endowment. And of course, everything has to be understood as these are result of contemplations of my own. Everyone has their own contemplations and so forth. But the eighth endowment is something that I call the ongoingness, right? It's a recognition that we of what we need to do over deep history, right? Of 1,000 years or greater, and what do we need to do? Who do we need to do in this moment to ensure the ongoingness of our life, right? So it's really about truly having a much longer horizon for our existence, and it's related to, again, it's related to the protector, right? The protector endowment is about how do we make sure everybody is safe, right? How do we protect people? How do we protect ourselves from the asteroid that's going to hit us, right? um, and there's a certain immediacy about that, but the ongoingness, anticipates this sort of deep future. um, and anyway, I just put that out there. It's interesting. It's an interesting discussion. Other people have said, well, what about this endowment or what about that endowment? And I love those conversations as well.
Now, but I think that the eighth endowment on the feminine settler, builder, protector is really the one where the understanding of seeding life, when the conscious explorer, where it continues, and where the settler, builder, protector is more connected to the first obligation that you have in the book, which the first obligation is about us and the environment.
Yeah, the first right. Right. The three obligations. The first obligation is about right. It's about us taking care of each other.
Us, our own survival, and then the twin obligation, one is to our environment, and then the other obligation is to life, to life continuing the expansion of life. And I think that the eight endowment, the fourth, no, the seventh and the eighth, I guess, are more connected to the twin obligation that is concerned about life, right?
I would say that because they, like I said, like I say in the book, it's switching. The seventh endowment switches from more from the me and to the we, right? So we're and this is nothing new. I mean, a lot of people talk about this in terms of consciousness, evolving consciousness, that we ultimately need to think in terms of we, instead of just take care of me or me and mine, and what I have. I'm protecting me and mine. I'm concerned about I'm concerned about my entire community or the world family and so forth. So if you could imagine, if everybody in the world was concerned about the welfare of every other person in the world, it would be a different place. It'd be a totally different place, right? I'm not sure what that would look like, but it would be a lot different.
And this is where Grant, the character in your book, goes, that as we move to the we and into space, then there's going to be a better equilibrium. And where the places, I I don't entirely disagree, but my from my perspective is that is one swing of the pendulum, right? It works for a certain time until it becomes too cumbersome into the we. I mean, we know of different cultures, like in the Japanese culture, where it's too much about the we, not enough about the individual. And one of the attractions of the industrial world in America was that now it was putting the I first. It was giving the opportunity for innovation at the expense of the we. And now we're getting to that other extreme, and where now the I has become more of a, it's becoming, a little bit more dangerous. We need to be reminded of the we, until there's this, again, this constant move between these two poles, these two energies. But there's never a point where you're in perfect alignment and then there it stays, because then it wouldn't go anywhere after that, right?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I'm not really thinking of this in a geopolitical context, because certainly communism, is a failed, in many ways, a failed experiment. So it's really a more of a social, orientation. But I do think, hey, listen, I mean, I one of my favorite shows is The Expanse, right? So, and we know that in the world of The Expanse, people are just as dysfunctional as they are here on Earth. And so, yeah, we want to be careful not to presume that just because you're going into space, you're going to have these expansive your consciousness is going to be awakened and so forth. And we even know that from the astronauts. There's a lot of talk about, I'm sure you're familiar with the overview effect, Frank White's overview effect, and some astronauts that have had tremendously transcendent peak experiences, looking down at Earth and the beauty of it. And other astronauts were like, you know what? It was really nice, but I had a lot of work to do up there, and they didn't feel, they thought it was beautiful, but they didn't necessarily have any kind of, they weren't transformed in any particular way. Um, so we have to, that's a reality as we move up there, and in terms of the arc of the evolution of human consciousness. How that's going to continue to evolve. That's an open question as well, right? So, um, yeah. So,
I wrote, you're talking about seeds, seeds of life going out to the outer space through us as we carry them. I wrote this piece on the future space called Mycelium and Rockets. It was back in, I think, a year ago when the entire conversation after uh, the Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk building their giant rockets and all the parallels that people wanted to make it about comparing big whatever it is. But I watched the documentary about mushrooms on Netflix with Paul Stamets, and the insight that I had was, it was amazing how every time life needs to seed something, whether it's from sperms or mushrooms or spores, it always has the typical same shape, which is, it's kind of a tube, and then you have this bulb at the top. And I was making the parallel that now we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not doing anything different. We're still going to be seeding life, but beyond the planet. And the physicality of that tool is the same, whether it's biologic or whether it's technologic, but it's the same kind of shape. And when it comes to seeding life, nature somehow has figured out that this is the most
you talk you talk
logical
you
logical
talk about
shape.
the shape of a rocket, for
Yeah,
example. That's
yeah.
uh, Yeah, I think I think that's worth exploring. Obviously, much has been said about Jeff Bezos's rocket. I won't, and what it looks like, but I think that there could be I'd like to think there'd be a serious conversation around that, because embedded and I have a series of slides where we talk about the evolution of different civilizations throughout time have been intrigued or interested in creating these monoliths, whether it's a tower or whether it's uh, uh, some kind of a large standing structure that goes higher and higher, or as high as their capability could do it, whether it's a cathedral or a pyramid or a skyscraper, right? So there is this implicit or inherent desire to build these sort of tall structures that reach up to the heaven, right? So now we're building these super tall structures that are able to not only reach up to the heaven but actually take off into the heaven themselves. And I would say that uh, and again, getting if you sort of follow my line of logic, that the humankind with our endowments sort of came into existence for this purpose. Maybe not this is maybe not this is our only purpose, but from a planetary standpoint, we came to for this purpose so that at every stage in our development, especially collectively as civilizations and so forth, we have organized the resources and had this strange desire to create these obelisks or these structures that reach up to the heaven over and over and over again. And I just don't think that there's any. I don't think that it's an accident. I think that it is something that is part of us, and that has been part and parcel of this whole, like I said, a 50,000 year process that has gone helped us get to the point where we're a spacefaring civilization.
There's a conversation I often have with people, and one of the arguments that keeps coming back is like, oh no, we can't go and and create more cities in other places. We have to manage our own first. And the place where I find myself going is we have to think of all these new people who will inhabit these new frontier, these new places. Not doing so would be robbing their future, in the same way that if we had applied this mindset of like, no, we cannot go anywhere because of this and that, most of us wouldn't be here today. Like if we had decided like, oh no, we all live in the same village in Africa, or we all going to stay in Europe because why, it would be awful to go to North America and not to do anything. Well, that would be, I mean, we wouldn't be here talking about that. We wouldn't even exist. And I think that it's a really selfish argument, and not thinking of like, well, there's going to be an entire future of people that are working, that are going to be at the place where they look back and they say, thank you for these people who risked everything to go and create these new land, new land of opportunities, these new cities, and elevated the human experience, because I am there because of them, in the same way that I exist today because of all the others before me who pushed the boundaries. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, well, you're speaking to. I think one of the things I brought up in the book is this whole notion of planetary inertia, right? So there is this like tension of a lot of people that don't, no, we have to stay here, and I think that's also, and that to a certain extent that is maybe a useful impulse. But it's always been, we are fundamentally a migratory species, right? More than any other species, because we manage to migrate to every corner of the livable planet. But probably at each stage, now you're talking about going from Europe to the New World during the period of discovery, But let's face it, for the last 50,000 years, 100,000 years or so, we've been migrating from one region to the next, and I bet you dollars to donuts every time somebody said, you know what, I'm going to get together my little group here, and we're going to go up to this next place. There were people in their village that said, no, 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 don't do that. You got to stay here because we need you here, and and we need your help here. If you go away, you're not going to be helping us, and yeah, you may find new land, new places to harvest or new hunting grounds, but you have to help us restore our hunting grounds here, or those kinds of logic. And I think that's probably it's probably something that's been repeated 1,000 times, and that's certainly going to be repeated now. And I think, but as long as there are people that desire to make that transition into space, it's going to be a small group of people. Now, when I say small, maybe initially, tens of thousands. Again, once we start getting a bit of a foothold there, but I think sort of like Europe, sort of like the United States, where initially it was a big deal, in the 15th, in the 16th century. And it was a big deal to get on a ship and come to the New World and settle here. But by the 19th century, coming to the New World was relatively easy because, infrastructure was established, cities were established, was thriving. There was clear paths to opportunity and so forth. I think I think a similar thing will happen once these communities in space are firmly established, and the opportunities are identified and clear, and it's relatively uh, it's relatively safe to travel to space and back, and I think you'll start seeing it'll be like the United States was, I guess, the Golden Mountain. It was called by the Chinese. It was sort of a destination for people who were looking to make a new life for themselves. Maybe then didn't have as much opportunities where they were. I like to think it'll have that draw on future generations who will say, I want to do something. I want to do something significant. Back in the day, it was when I graduated from college. My father sent me a note, and all he wrote on it was "Go West, young man." Which is that goes back to the 19th century, right? Where that was where your fortune was going to be made. Um, and I think for the folks who remain here, that's fine too. I mean, obviously, not everybody left Europe. Europe is doing great, and frankly, a lot of the wealth that they were able to create was a result of the settlements, and then of course, obviously you're bringing, hopefully you what you don't want to repeat is, the kinds of uh, kind of atrocities that were wrought upon indigenous people and so forth. And so, we just have to be, hopefully we're going forward with a more mindful attitude about who we are.
Well, I mean, it's the conscious explorer, or there's an understanding of consequences that maybe were not that evident in the wanderer and the inventor, or at the beginning where you just, there's a righteousness to it about. But there's, I want to go back a little bit to, you're saying the human species is migratory species. I think that life is by definition migratory. You look at every species, they're birds that literally go from the South Pole to the North Pole just to give birth, and they follow the food source, or make sure that they protect. But I think that what the human species has done is add up the engineering aspect of that mobility, and the sense of going to places to reinvent yourself, the opportunity. I mean, it's not just a new continent. I mean, it happens in cities. Going to New York or going to LA or going to the West, like your father said, so that you can reinvent yourself. Those are the places where you can do that. Obviously, if everybody did that, the world would not work either. If every single person chose to be an entrepreneur either, like, the world would not work. You need entrepreneurs, but you need the workforce, and you need people, like, you need a spectrum, a diversity of talent and skills and personalities. You need the masculine energy and the feminine energy. Even within a same-sex couple, you still have those different energies that work together. And moving beyond, it's not just because now, like, we want to go over there. It's just that now we have the tools to continue that life expansion and to take it. So every time that I hear the arguments like, no, we cannot, if we see a planet and it's barren, it's better to leave it barren. And I'm like, there's absolutely no benefit for life to venture into the universe, or to develop the complexity, to invest billions of years in developing in complexity, so that you can get the tools to move and export that life and that knowledge, so that you can leave the barren places alone and say, I mean, we might decide to choose certain planet more for their their beauty, for their conservation aspect, because they're not necessarily the best place to live. But in terms of leaving the universe barren just because we don't want to contaminate it, I think for me just goes against just the way that life works, and doesn't, and life, not that I want to give life a personality, but life is not interested in leaving the universe blank, and barren, right?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, um, species, I don't know what the numbers are, but there are hundreds of species come into existence and go out of existence through no effort on the part of humans. Although humans are having quite a big impact on the on species going extinct. I think there is I think that there does have to be a bit of a balance, especially with Mars. There's a good chance certainly a good chance we're going to find evidence of former life on Mars, and may even find existing life on Mars. And this all gets back to the question of how ubiquitous is life in the universe. Obviously, if we find microbial life on Mars, that would be huge, because that would mean that the universe is teeming with life. Um, and I respect that. I actually, I really do respect that attitude, that we have to be mindful of that. But I do think there has to be a balance. Some purists will say, well, if there's one microbe on Mars, then Mars should be off limits for human occupation. Well, you know, I think that there's a balance, in that. I think that we can go to Mars, and I think that is a place for us to begin this process of expanding civilization out beyond Earth. Um, there are other options. Certainly, you can mine the asteroids, and you can construct, O'Neill type floating habitats that rotate and create artificial gravity. And there are certainly proponents that recommend that option. And if we went that way, and if we got really good at building those habitats, and some of the earlier designs by Gerard O'Neill, and folks don't know who he is, I definitely recommend you looking him up. He's talking about floating habitats that's cylindrical in nature, that rotate, creating artificial gravity, where 10,000 people could live or more. And that's certainly, Jeff Bezos is a big proponent of that direction. Um, so I think we just need to be mindful. I think that we need to set up base camps on the moon. We need to set up camps on Mars. We need to um, uh, become familiar with those terrains, and then as those communities expand and evolve over time, and populations grow in those locations, we just need to be mindful of become more and more mindful of what life might be there. And wouldn't that be exciting if there was? So some to be seen.
Well, now with James Webb would just bring us new photos of billions and billions of worlds. It's
Oh my God! It's just blows your mind. You look into those pictures, and you keep expanding them, and you see the detail in each little blob is like an entire galaxy. It's just astounding. And I think bringing that up, especially in terms of the prospects for us to travel to exoplanets, or planets beyond our solar system, that's one of the passions of Pete Warden, who's one of our advisors of the Beyond Earth Institute, trying to identify these worlds, trying to construct the craft that could actually travel the distance, that those kinds of distances. Um, That's a multi-generation. I shouldn't say that. That's probably um, at a minimum 100-year objective. Um, it's just going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I think the moon and Mars are going to provide the first initial test beds for us to gain foothold and understand what it's going to take to live and work in space and so forth. Um, but other opportunities are going to come on very quickly, especially as we gain that foothold, and once we have a means by which we can construct things in once we can actually do have an industry in space that can not only serve the Earth but serves the space community, then I think things will happen very rapidly. Earlier, you talked about the amount of time that it took from the first landing of Columbus to say the founding of the United States, and yeah, that was what was that 100, 200, 200 years, 250 years, about thereabouts, a little bit longer.
Yeah, Columbus was 15. Columbus was 15 something.
So I mean, if you compare, I mean, you could, yeah, I mean, say if you said Sputnik was the starting point. All right, so we're 60, whatever, 60 or 70 years in, and uh, and that's kind of yeah, that's probably not a bad benchmark. It's going to take us decades. It's going to take us decades to get to a place where we have a meaningful, significant habitat that's maybe housing a substantial population, 50 people, 100 people, that sort of thing. Um, but you're right. It's a process, and that's why again, to get back to this question of teams is very important, because it does require this sort of sustained effort and commitment by government, by individuals, by engineers and stuff, to kind of stay on track, because it will take decades to unfold. And of course, we have people insist that we have uh, that each step pays for itself in some economic way, so that we can kind of bootstrap the next round of innovations and so forth. And it's an exciting future. And I do think that getting back to the evolutionary impulse, in that feeling like whatever happens, we feel the impulse to want to move forward. And I like to say that we have this desire to move forward in space, and then we sort of back out of that to come up with the reasons why we should be doing it, that might make practical sense. But maybe it doesn't. Maybe it isn't necessarily practical, other than people feeling a passion to do it. I mean, I don't think people are passionate about wanting to go in space because they want to make a lot of money. I mean, I think maybe some people are, but I think most people are in the game, see it as have a much bigger view of why we're doing it.
Well, I think Sputnik might be more compared to when the Vikings. Well, there were theories that the Vikings were the first one to set foot, on the or the. But then, and now here we are. Steve, if people want to get the obligation, where can they get it?
So they can go to Amazon.com. They can go to Amazon.com, and it's the obligation. Just type in my name and the obligation. Um, let's see, the that's really the best thing. I mean, I don't know if you can provide people my email. I'm happy to.
Yes, we'll put the links to your book and to Beyond Earth Institute, and to make sure, because you're also on Twitter and on LinkedIn, because we want to make sure that they have access if they want to reach out to you. And I also believe, do you want to say anything about October? Because I know that your Beyond Earth is working on something. Is there anything that you can share on that?
Yeah, no, I think we yes, thank you so much. So I am the president of the Beyond Earth Institute, and we're having a policy symposium, a Beyond Earth symposium, our inaugural event in October 13th in Washington, D.C. I would just say that come to beyondearth.org, and details will be available there. And if and we are actually in the process of loading that information up. If you don't see that, certainly just put your name and just send us a note via the contact page, and we'll keep you in the loop about that. That's going to be very exciting, and certainly include my email as well, Daniel. People want to contact me directly, and that's at Steve. I'm just simply Steve at beyondearth.org, and I'd love to hear from anyone about the Beyond Earth Institute or the book, The Obligation. So love to hear from you.
Recommend it for anyone. It's a really nice read. You can do that over the weekend, and it makes you think, which is usually the best thing about books. And Steve, I think I'm going to see you in October in Washington, D.C. I'm really looking forward.
Can't
Thank
wait.
you so much. And we'll do another one of those fairly soon. So until then, take good care.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel.